잘 모르는 분도 많고 또 잘못된 정보를 접한 분도 꽤 있더라고요. 사이버 외교사절 딴 방크의 일원으로서 제가 한글에 대한 올바른 정보를 전달해 드릴게요. 한글은 조선 4대 왕인 세종대왕이 1443년에 창제한 글자예요. 한글은 자음과 모음으로 구성되어 있는데요. 자음은 입술, 이, 목구멍과 같이 발음 기관의 모양이나 그 움직임을 본떠 만들었고요. 모음은 하늘, 땅, 사람을 본떠 만들었답니다. 한글의 창제 원리와 사용법을 써놓은 훈민정음 해례본은 1962년 대한민국 국보로 지정되었고 1997년 유네스코 세계기록유산으로 등재되었습니다. 창적이고 과학적이며 아름다운 문자인 한글, 한국인의 위대한 문화유산입니다. 한국 바로 알리기, 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
drawing more fans from all over the world. Local consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% since rate in April. Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences. Like the number of hybrid cars are registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million with this locally developed Yuri rocket.
Arirang. Gyeongju, a city that holds 1,000 years of history. The cherished values, preserved over time, have shaped who we are today. Now, through new encounters, we step into a better future. Sustainability, innovation. With the spirit of connection, a new millennium story begins. As APEC and Gyeongju come together. APEC meets Gyeongju.
In our headlines on this Monday, September 22nd, here in South Korea. President Lee Jae-myung is en route to the U.S. to take part in this year's United Nations General Assembly and to preside over a United Nations Security Council open debate on artificial intelligence and international peace. And speaking to the foreign media, President Lee Jae-myung suggests a nuclear weapons freeze for North Korea as an emergency interim measure toward the final goal of denuclearization, while the regime's Kim Jong-un shares fresh disdain for South Korea. Meanwhile, a special group of international musicians are among those seeking to share their take on Korea's Kugak at a global expo currently taking place at the center of the country until October 11th. We start with a preview of President Lee Jae-myung's agenda at the United Nations in New York this week as he partakes in the 80th General Assembly. Our presidential office correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
South Korea's presidential office says President Lee Jae-myung's trip to New York for this year's United Nations General Assembly will mark his full-fledged debut on the multilateral stage. Lee's first overseas visit after taking office in June was to the G7 summit in Canada, but this time the stage is far bigger, with some 190 heads of state and government expected to attend. While the president has several events lined up during his 5-day trip, two stand out. The first will be his address to the UN General Assembly on Tuesday local time.
Through this address, President Lee will declare South Korea's restoration of democracy, outline his administration's vision for the Korean Peninsula, and share how we can contribute to global peace and prosperity.
Much of the attention will be on Lee's message on North Korea as Seoul continues to extend overtures for dialogue despite Pyongyang remaining hostile. Another major highlight will come on Wednesday when President Lee chairs an open debate at the UN Security Council, the first time for any South Korean leader. This was made possible by the country's rotating presidency of the 15-member body this month. The theme will be artificial intelligence, international peace, and security.
Overall, it enhances South Korea's diplomatic standing and provides an opportunity to advocate for issues important to the country and to the broader international community.
Eyes are also on the bilateral meetings Lee will hold on the sidelines. National Security Advisor Wi Sung-rak said the president is expected to meet with leaders of France, Italy, Uzbekistan, the Czech Republic, and Poland. But the big question is, will there be a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump? Wi said no summit is scheduled, but did not rule out an encounter at the UN headquarters. One expert says even a brief exchange could be significant, as ties between Seoul and Washington face uncertainty due to stalled trade negotiations and the recent detention of Korean workers in Georgia.
It would be good to reaffirm the positive chemistry the two leaders showed at the White House last month, even if detailed discussions on tariff deals aren't possible. If they can demonstrate some unity, I believe it could have a positive impact on the negotiations that are currently at a standstill.
President Lee will arrive in New York on Monday local time and return home on Friday. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung has proposed the possibility of a nuclear weapons production freeze by North Korea ahead of a complete disarmament. The regime's leader, for his part, has shared fresh disdain for South Korea, eliminating prospects of any engagement but leaving the door open to the U.S. Our Park Jun-an has details.
In a bid to ease long-standing tensions on the Korean peninsula, South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung has suggested what he described as a realistic solution to North Korea's nuclear program, emphasizing a freeze on weapons production over immediate denuclearization. Speaking to the BBC ahead of its departure for the U.S. on Monday to chair a UN Security Council meeting, Lee described such a freeze as an interim emergency measure that could halt Pyongyang's annual production of 15 to 20 additional nuclear weapons. He called the plan a feasible, realistic alternative while maintaining the long-term goal of full denuclearization. President Yi said rebuilding trust between South and North Korea is crucial, particularly given the previous Yoon administration's aggressive approach toward Pyongyang, adding that he believes these steps will encourage the North to resume negotiations. In an interview with Reuters on Friday, Yi said he has sought to ease tensions with North Korea, but Pyongyang has rejected Seoul's outreach, leaving him thoughtful about the near-term prospects for inter-Korean dialogue.
북한이 대화 자체를, 접촉 자체를 아예 거부하고 있기 때문에 남북 간의 소통, 대화, 협력은 당분간은 어려울 것으로 판단이 됩니다.
However, North Korea has been rejecting approaches from the Yi administration with sharp criticism. In a Supreme People's Assembly address over the weekend, Kim Jong-un clarified that unification is impossible and classified the two Koreas as completely incompatible entities that are two separate states with no need for shared endeavors. Kim emphasized that denuclearization is meaningless for North Korea, which declared itself a nuclear power in 2022, vowing never to give up its nuclear arsenal. Despite the hostility towards Seoul, Kim left the door open for talks with Washington. During the address, Kim recalled personal interactions with U.S. President Donald Trump and suggested dialogue could resume if the U.S. abandons its denuclearization fixation and recognizes North Korea as a nuclear state, paving the way for peaceful coexistence. Park Junan, Arirang News.
Also, President Jae-myung has warned of a potential financial crisis here in South Korea should the U.S. maintain its investment demand without the presence of guardrails. Our correspondent Moon Ji-young explains.
President Lee Jae-myung warned the nation's economy could face a repeat of its 1997 financial meltdown if Seoul accepts Washington's current demands in stalled trade talks without sufficient safeguards. He delivered this stark warning during an interview with Reuters in his office on Friday, ahead of his trip to New York for the UN General Assembly.
통화 스와프가 되지 않는 상태에서 3,500억 달러를 인출해서 지금 미국이 요구하는 방식으로 전액 현금으로 송금 투자해야 되는 상황이라면 대한민국은 다시 IMF를 맞게 됩니다.
This stems from a verbal trade agreement made in July. The deal aimed for the U.S. to lower tariff on South Korean goods in exchange for $350 billion in investment from Seoul. However, disagreements on how this investment would be handled have prevented the final signing. An expert echoed President Yi's concerns regarding the potential impact of such capital outflows.
Take into account the potential impact of the sudden outflow of the cash in terms of the international US dollar. That is a really serious burden for our country's financial status in terms of the international settlement currency reserve.
In fact, South Korea currently holds about $416 billion in foreign exchange reserves. This means that the $350 billion investment deal would account for over 84% of the total reserves, posing a significant challenge to the nation's financial stability. The urgency for a solution lies in the lack of a standing currency swap arrangement. Such arrangements allow countries to exchange their currencies to help stabilize their financial markets in times of crisis. Historically, South Korea and the U.S. have signed these arrangements only twice, during the 2008 global financial crisis and the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. On the other hand, Japan presents a stark contrast. It boasts more than double South Korea's foreign exchange reserves, with a $550 billion investment package accounting for 42% of its total. Crucially, Japan's yen is an international key currency, and it maintains a permanent swap line with the U.S. This provides a robust financial safety net, a luxury South Korea lacks as it does not hold a key currency itself. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
Visa applications that are for the U.S. are poised to become more expensive for foreign travelers and have become very expensive for high-skilled foreign workers. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
The United States is moving to significantly raise visa-related fees, sparking concern among foreign workers, companies, and travelers alike. The fee for the Electronic System for Travel Authorization, or ESTA, which allows short-term visits of up to 90 days under the Visa Waiver Program, will nearly double. The cost will rise from the current $21 to $40 starting September 30th. The move comes as U.S. authorities tighten visa policies more broadly, affecting not only short-term travelers but also international students. The ESTA program was used by many of the 316 South Korean workers detained in a large immigration raid at a Georgia battery plant earlier this month. South Korean companies are urging clearer guidelines for business travel, arguing that lengthy U.S. visa procedures are disrupting projects that benefit the American economy. Last Friday, Washington also announced plans to drastically increase fees for H-1B visas, known as specialty occupation visas. Effective as of Sunday, the visa fee has jumped from $1,000 to $100,000. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said last week that the policy was intended to prioritize jobs for Americans, at one point describing the measure as a $100,000 annual fee. The comment caused panic among tech giants like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, which rely heavily on foreign talent. Officials later clarified that the fee will be a one-time charge at the initial application stage, not a recurring annual payment. Still, concerns remain. H-1B visas are widely used in IT, medicine, and life sciences, and more than 70% of recipients are Indian nationals. For South Koreans, roughly 2,000 H-1B visas are issued each year. Seoul's foreign ministry says it is reviewing the potential impact of the U.S. changes on Korean workers and companies and will continue communication with Washington. 이승재, Arirang News.
In other news, applications for the second round of consumption coupons are underway starting today until October 31st. Now, this time around, the coupons are available to those within the bottom 90% income bracket based on health insurance contributions. For one-person households, the cutoff is 220,000 won in health insurance contribution, and for four-person households, the sum stands at 510,000 won. Also, high asset individuals with a property tax base of over 1.2 billion won or annual earnings from financial assets exceeding 20 million won are not eligible. Meanwhile, those eligible are receiving 100,000 Korean won or some $72 US. On the international front, Britain and Canada have become the first G7 nations to recognize a Palestinian state, adding their weight behind a substantial number of UN member states that are seeking to pressure Israel against its intense military operation in Gaza City. Our Park Gonu reports.
4 more countries have joined the list of those recognizing Palestine as a state. They include 2 G7 countries, the UK and Canada, marking the first time such economic powerhouses have taken the step.
We recognized the State of Israel more than 75 years ago as a homeland for the Jewish people. Today, we join over 150 countries who recognize a Palestinian state also.
The Palestinian Authority welcomes such a remark, calling it an important and necessary step to achieve lasting peace. And similar remarks for Palestine's recognition came from Australia and Portugal, also on the eve of the United Nations General Assembly, resulting in at least 151 of the 193 UN member states now recognizing Palestine's status. However, the U.S. called such actions performative, adding that its priorities include the release of hostages. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also strongly rejected the country's move.
For those leaders who recognize a Palestinian state after the horrific massacre on October 7th, you are giving a huge reward to terrorism. And I have another message for you. It will not happen.
while saying he'll fight against the false propaganda and the calls to establish a Palestinian state. He hinted at more messages coming towards the international community. Alongside these moves, countries including France are expected to back a Palestinian state at the UN later this week. But as countries including South Korea have not yet confirmed their status on a Palestinian state, eyes are on now how many more countries will move to recognize Palestine in the coming days. 박건우, Arirang News.
Over in Lebanon, 5 people were killed, including 4 Americans, in an Israeli drone strike on Sunday. The Israel Defense Forces confirmed the strike, saying it had targeted an operative of the Hezbollah terror group in a southern Lebanese town, while also acknowledging that several uninvolved civilians were also killed. The Lebanese state-run NNA News reported that a drone had fired 2 missiles at a motorcycle and a nearby car. The motorcyclist was the apparent target of the strike and was killed, but a father and his 3 children in the nearby car were also killed, while their mother was injured and is in critical condition. Also, this past Sunday, on the southernmost coast of the Crimean Peninsula, 3 people were killed and 16 injured. Now, this is according to Russia's defense ministry that claimed a Ukrainian drone had targeted the resort town of Foros, which has no military installations. Crimea was seized and annexed by Russia back in the year 2014. Ukraine has yet to address Russia's allegation. Back on the local front, last Friday we brought you the sights and sounds of a global expo in celebration of traditional music. Well, today my colleague Park Hyo-bin tells us the story of a special group of international musicians who are seeking to share their take on Korea's 국악.
K-pop may have crossed borders, but Korea's traditional music, 국악, is also finding a global voice. On stages where the Daegum and Gyeonggi minyo once stood alone, accordion, African drums, and Mongolian strings now join in. At the center is Soundtrack, an ensemble of foreign musicians breathing new life into 국악. Members come from diverse backgrounds, yet a single curiosity about Korean sound brought them together.
About 10 years ago in Mexico, my Korean teacher played Arirang in class, and that's when I first fell in love with 국악, especially Gyeonggi minyo.
For me, it's not so long time ago because I came to Korea 2 years ago. I wanted to know more about culture and, of course, music. Because I play flute, I was like, there must be a flute in Korea too. And then I started slowly getting to know through Daegum.
After a rigorous audition last April, the group trained for 5 months under master musicians. Their debut came in August on an international stage in Uzbekistan. Soon after, they were invited to the Yeongdong World Traditional Music and Arts Expo in South Korea. For them, 국악 is more than performance. It's both an art and a responsibility tied to Korea's cultural roots.
We got chosen out of like how many people, right? So of course excitement was there, but at the same time the sense of like pretty high responsibility. We are playing Korean traditional music, which is, I think, a very special music.
Rather than simply recreating tradition, they blended 국악 with instruments and techniques from their own cultures, creating original arrangements. As one member put it, no matter where an instrument comes from, its purpose is the same: to move people's hearts.
In every country, instruments are the same. They come from the human heart. Wherever you go, traditional instruments carry people's stories.
For these foreign musicians, 국악's power lies not only in its melodies, but in its emotions, particularly the concept of han, which means a deep lingering sorrow and resilience that's at the heart of Korean culture.
For me, it's the emotion, the feeling that is coming with 국악. And for us as foreigners, it's of course difficult to say that we understand 국악 and the feeling Han itself. But I feel trying to understand or getting close to it. I never felt that in my life before when I played the European 전통 음악.
Beyond their music, Soundtrack has a clear mission: to introduce Korean traditional music to a wider global audience and break down the barriers that often confine cultural heritage.
I want to put the boundaries down that all the other foreigners are afraid to touch 국악, like you said. I want to be like, maybe it's a big word, but kind of an ambassador to show that it's possible. So music is for the world, so I want to show that to everyone.
With every note, soundtrack turns Kugak into a language beyond borders, a living dialogue where tradition meets the world. Park Hyubin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the venue of this year's APEC leaders meeting, Gyeongju, is hosting a number of events to share its cultural heritage as it prepares to welcome global leaders to the annual Multilateral Economic Forum. Our An Sung-jin files this report.
As APEC 2025 Korea approaches, the host city of Gyeongju is filled with cultural events. And the Silla Kings Festival is just one of them. Hosted by Gyeongsangbuk-do Province, the event aims to promote the 1,000-year-old history of the Silla dynasty, which had Gyeongju as its capital. From trying out hanbok to exploring traditional Korean games, local residents and visitors have come to enjoy the vibrant atmosphere.
We got to try out traditional hanbok.
It was a great chance to understand the history of the Silla dynasty.
We happened to just pass by while walking around, but the music made us curious. It's an interesting experience.
The highlight of the festival was an interactive media performance and Silla-style traditional hanbok showcase, providing a glimpse into the Silla dynasty's history and culture. Further building on the success of this event, the city will be hosting a wider range of programs at its historical sites to further promote the city's cultural heritage and APEC 2025 Korea. An Sung-jin, Arirang News, Gyeongju.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. Tensions are rising in the Netherlands just over a month ahead of its snap general election as police in The Hague violently clashed with anti-immigration protesters, demanding stricter asylum policies. On Saturday, a protest organized by a right-wing activist drew approximately 1,500 people to The Hague, with demonstrators expressing their dissatisfaction with current asylum policies and calling for tighter immigration control. Protesters threw rocks and bottles, blocked a highway, set a police car on fire, and also attempted to advance towards the Dutch Parliament complex. In response, authorities deployed tear gas and water cannons to disperse the crowd. 2 police officers were injured, and around 30 individuals were arrested. Prime Minister Dick Schoof condemned the violence, describing the events as shocking and bizarre. Immigration remains a significant rallying point ahead of the October 29th elections, reflecting growing polarization and frustration in the country. In the Philippines, police and anti-corruption protesters clashed on the streets of the capital Manila on Sunday. Tens of thousands gathered near the presidential palace, demanding accountability for alleged corruption in flood control projects worth over $9.5 billion. Several people were arrested for throwing rocks, bottles, and even firebombs, and dozens of police officers were injured. Similar anti-corruption protests have recently emerged in other parts of Asia, including Nepal, where protests have been led by Gen Z activists. In Indonesia, protests focused on addressing corrupt elites, and in East Timor, citizens demanded transparent governance. In Paris, France, waiters and waitresses dressed in full work attire raced through the capital city on Sunday, carrying trays balanced with a cup of coffee, a croissant, and a glass of water. In the traditional cafe race, a 4-kilometer race revived last year after over a decade-long hiatus. The goal is to finish the race quickly without spilling anything. 1 drop of water or a slight tilt to the tray can result in time penalties. Organizers say the race is a tribute to cafe culture in Paris, meaning both as entertainment and as recognition of the demanding work undertaken by serving staff. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
The clear autumn weather continued across the country today. It was chilly in the morning and evening, but the sun shined through the clouds in the middle of the day, and the temperature rose significantly. In particular, the lowest temperature in Taebaek fell to the single digits at 9.9 degrees. However, it moved to 20 degrees during the day with a huge daily temperature range of more than 10 degrees. Starting with Jeju Island and the south coast tomorrow, it will rain across the country on Wednesday. With rain falling, the daytime temperature will stay at 23 degrees in Seoul. Tomorrow morning, Seoul and Gyeongju will start off at 18 degrees, Chuncheon at 15 degrees. Daily highs will up to 27 degrees in Seoul, Gyeongju and Busan, Jeju 28 degrees. Rain will continue until Thursday all over the country. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. As always, thank you for watching.
철이라는 게 정말 중요한 자원이에요. 광물에서 얻어서 힘들게 만들어진 철이라는 자원인데 그게 정말 너무 쉽게 쓰고 버려지죠. 쓰는지도 모르고. 빵 같은 거 포장되어 있는 빵끈 철사 같은 경우에는 정말 그 한 3초 손에 입고 이제 쓰레기통에 버려지잖아요. 그 안에 철이 들어있는 것도 이제 인지를 못하고. 저 스스로도 작업하기 전에는 저도 그냥 풀러서 쓰레기통에 버리고 했는데 작업을 하고 나니까 그런 철사들이 정말 많이 모인다는 거를 알게 됐어요. 저는 이제 더 이상 일회용으로 한 번 쓰고 버리는 철사가 나오지 않아서 제발 철사를 돈을 주고 사서 작업을 할 수 있었으면 좋겠다는 생각도 하고 있습니다. 숲과 산과 강이 정말 나를 보호하고 있구나라는 생각을 이 글귀를 읽으면서 생각을 해서 이걸 제가 제일 좋아하는 문장입니다. 철사뿐만 아니라 내가 내 손에 들어오는 것들이 나한테 꼭 필요한 건지 이게 나한테 정말 유용한 건지 이런 생각을 좀 해보면 좋겠어요. 나는 버려지는 철사에 새 삶을 주는 그리너다.
held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
In Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the Status UN summit.
It's a massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang.
Foreign Minister Cho Hyun held a press conference with members of the foreign media to touch upon matters between Seoul and Washington, as well as those related to global peace and stability. Hello, welcome. Hope you had a good weekend. It's Monday, September 22nd here in Seoul, and you're watching Press Perspective. Now, today we touch upon the latest developments on the diplomatic front, as shared by Foreign Minister Cho Hyun and more. For this, I have freelance journalist Rafael Rashid here in the studio. Rafael, it's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me again.
I also have Professor Che Han-jin at Gyeongju University. Joining our talk virtually, Professor Che, as always, it's a pleasure.
Good evening, Sonny.
Right, we will start here in the studio. Rafael, so Foreign Minister Cho Hyun held his foreign press conference last Friday, I believe, to share his thoughts on a wide range of international issues. First, could you walk us through the issues addressed then?
Sure. So Foreign Minister Cho Hyun had his press conference, and he did cover quite a lot of, diplomatic agenda, reflecting a lot of the kind of complex challenges that are already facing the Lee Jae-myung administration over the past 100 days since taking office. The main, I think, what dominated the discussion at the press conference that I was actually attending was the Georgia detention raid issue. The foreign minister confirmed that Seoul is launching a formal investigation into alleged human rights violations that affected the Koreans who were detained over there, of course. And he acknowledged that the detentions, he said that they did happen during law enforcement of U.S. domestic law. So he did acknowledge that, that he can't prevent that. But also emphasized that Korea's duty at the end of the day is to protect its own citizens, its own nationals, where rights have been violated. US-Korea relations was also mentioned and discussed several times. Of course, the ongoing visa issue and trade disputes, trade tensions. So Cho, he revealed that they had established a working group with Secretary of State Rubio to address the visa issue that came out of this raid in Georgia. But he did mention that these are not necessarily preconditions for Korea's promised investment commitments in the hundreds of billions of dollars. China also emerged as one of the themes. He expressed confidence that Xi Jinping would be coming to the APEC summit happening next month. Japan issues were also raised, defending the administration's pragmatic approach, noting that, of course, Korea has historical issues or grievances, but that should not derail from kind of practical cooperation between the two sides. And then on North Korea, he confirmed Seoul's continued emphasis on dialogue despite Pyongyang's unresponsive stance or cold shoulder, as Lee Jae-myung put it the other day. He also brought up Russia, mentioned that Seoul doesn't have any current plans to slap on additional sanctions, but said that they were basically monitoring the situation given North Korea's military alliance with Moscow. I guess on a final point, when it comes to Russia, he did mention that he's open to some kind of Russia playing a mediating role when it comes to issues on the Korean Peninsula. This is, of course, after we saw the National Assembly Speaker, Woo Won-sik, who was told by Putin the other day that maybe Putin could play a kind of mediating role. So I think South Korea is open to that. But again, kind of to wrap up, many complex challenges already facing this administration.
Right, complex challenges. Staying with that then, Professor Cho, the foreign minister, he also claimed that the new administration had faced an unpredictable international landscape during its first 100 days in office. If I were to ask you to point to two main factors perhaps behind the unpredictability for South Korea, Professor Cho, what would you choose to highlight?
Yes, I agree with Minister Cho that South Korea is facing a very unpredictable international landscape. If I had to say two sources of unpredictability, I would say the following. The first one is very strong and unpredictable leadership of Donald Trump. President Trump is showing a very bold and unconventional approach to diplomacy. As Raphael just noted, there was a large-scale immigration crackdown in Georgia, where the hundreds of South Korean engineers and workers were detained, and some of them were actually arrested in chains. And many in South Korea felt very uncomfortable and also angry, and they felt that the United States, especially the Trump administration, is not really respecting South Korea. And what is more concerning is that the President Trump has asked Korean government to invest up to $350 billion, mostly in cash, and also the 90% of the profit from this investment will be taken by the United States. So this is extremely high amount, and the one that could put major pressure on South Korean economy and also business community. So that is the big source of unpredictability. And the second source is the growing tension between the United States and China. The South Korea has maintained close ties with both countries in reality. So we are relying on the United States for security and technology, and also we need China for trade and also regional peace in Korean Peninsula. But however, as the rivalry between the two great powers intensify, the South Korean diplomatic balancing is becoming more difficult. So Minister Cho's recent visit to Beijing shows that the Seoul is trying to manage both relationships very carefully. So in short, South Korea needs a very smart and flexible diplomacy to protect our national interests in this growingly divided and unpredictable world.
Right. And before we touch upon Foreign Minister Cho Hyun's sit down with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi, Raphael, I'd like to go back to that press conference. Now, like you mentioned, Foreign Minister Cho, he fielded quite a number of questions with regard to the raging wars in Ukraine and Gaza. I am aware that not much was shared. Do correct me if I'm wrong, but based on his brief responses, what can we assume about South Korea's stance with regard to these issues of international concern, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of reiterating what Professor Choi just said, it's all about this diplomatic balancing act. On Gaza, one journalist specifically asked, is he willing to call what's happening in Gaza a genocide? And would South Korea be willing to recognize Palestine as a state? The Minister Cho, he basically said that he had spoken to both the Palestinian and Israeli foreign ministers within days of each other. He described the situation in Gaza as truly heartbreaking, but he crucially avoided this kind of legal characterization, saying that these things take time to define events legally. So I think this suggests that Seoul wants to avoid the genocide kind of determination kind of the wording that UN bodies are now using and international observers are also using at the moment. And regarding Palestinian statehood recognition, Cho reaffirmed Korea's long-standing support for a two-state solution, but stopped short at this kind of immediate recognition. Of course, this comes, we saw just yesterday, the UK, Canada, and also Australia saying that they recognize the Palestinian state. I think, of course, South Korea will always be in between bigger powers, maybe aware of maybe the United States' stance. But again, I think Cho's responses revealed Seoul's commitment to this kind of strategic ambiguity that we have seen, not just in this administration, but other administrations as well, kind of trying to maintain kind of diplomatic relevance when needed. And also, again, this word that we keep on seeing time and time again, the Lee administration's pragmatic diplomacy. So engaging substantially or substantively without necessarily taking sides that could jeopardize Korea's broader strategic interests. At the same time, we did actually see the Ministry of Foreign Affairs last week condemn Israel's attack on Qatar. They called it an unacceptable act violating territorial sovereignty. And so I think it shows that Korea is willing to criticize maybe specific events or issues, but also avoiding kind of broader legal or political judgments. So I think this overall, I think this suggests that again, Korea is trying to maintain constructive relationships with all related parties, but also avoiding anything that could compromise its position, and especially in this growing world where we have a lot of polarization. And I think some people might say this is very clever and strategic of Lee Jae-myung. Some people might say it's unrealistic and that he should be, or the Korean government should be taking sides. But right now it's a very delicate balancing act. But it remains to be seen, if he can maintain this balancing act for the entire 5-year tenure of his administration.
Right. Professor Che, this next question might be a bit of a tricky one, but speaking purely within your capacity, of course, as a scholar, just as a scholar, what are your thoughts with regard to South Korea's obligations to arrest Russia's Vladimir Putin under an international criminal court warrant should he attend the APEC leaders meeting in the city of Gyeongju this autumn? I mean, where should South Korea's priorities lie?
Okay, this is a sensitive issue. It is true that President Putin is now under ICC arrest warrant for the abduction and illegal transfer of Ukrainian children during the war. And South Korea is now a member of the ICC, and that means Korea has a duty to support the ICC's legal procedure. But we need to understand also how the ICC actually works. The court has no police force of its own. So even if it issues an arrest warrant, it cannot carry out the arrest without the help of a national government. And for this reason, no sitting head of the state or even a rebel leader in power has ever been arrested by another country under an ICC warrant. Never. So if South Korea were to arrest President Putin during the APEC summit in Gyeongju, it would be the first time in history that one state detains a sitting leader of another major power under international law. And realistically, that would be seen as a declaration of war against Russia. So while I fully understand the legal and the ethical concern raised by some international community, the reality is that South Korean government is extremely unlikely even to consider such a move. I think the stakes are just too high.
Right, and staying with that, I wonder, Raphael, did you get a chance to ask Foreign Minister Cho Hyun about this issue?
Yeah, actually, I was about to butt in right now. I actually literally asked this very question to Foreign Minister Cho, assuming, because the invitation is on the table, but at the same time there are these certain legal considerations. Interestingly, Minister Cho avoided my question. He said that there were too many assumptions in the question and that he would not answer the question. So please forgive me not answering the question. And I think, again, Of course, South Korea is in a very difficult position, stuck in the middle, and I think likely we'll see that diplomatically and symbolically, South Korea would have had to invite Putin, Russia being a member of APEC, but realistically he will probably not come. Kremlin hasn't confirmed yet whether he will come, but I think the very likely thing is he won't come because it will put everyone in an awkward position.
Right. Staying with the upcoming APEC leaders meeting here in South Korea, US President Donald Trump says he'll be sitting down with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the multilateral APEC meeting here in South Korea. What do you suppose, Rafael, the implications of this proposed summit between these two rival leaders?
Yeah, I think this represents a kind of diplomatic windfall for Seoul, transforming Korea from a summit hosting nation into the kind of epicenter of global superpowers getting together and coming face to face. And especially now, Trump and Xi are likely, it seems, to be coming. And I think this will be the first time since around 2019, I believe, and this would be their first encounter, at least since Trump has assumed office again. Again, this is very crucial timing. The summit will open just 10 days before US-China tariff truce expires. So again, potentially making Gyeongju the venue where the two biggest, largest economies will escalate or resolve this trade conflict. And I think Korean officials will likely be, at least privately, a little bit excited about hosting what could be a pivotal moment in reshaping global economic order. I guess for South Korea specifically, this does create challenges, but also pressure, because Seoul, finds itself in the middle and basically facilitating this dialogue with these big powers, a key security partner and also the largest trading partner. And also many of the issues on the table will probably affect South Korea indirectly along the lines. But at the same time, I think this tests President Lee Jae-myung's pragmatic diplomacy strategy, because Korea will want to try to avoid appearing to favor or side with one or the other, whilst also potentially benefiting from any detente between the two sides. But I guess we can remain hopeful. Trump on Truth Social, his social media post, he described that he had a call with Xi Jinping and described it as very productive and with progress on many issues being made. So I think there is some momentum. And again, this will be very symbolic to have the two heads of state coming here in South Korea. And I guess the stakes, again, they extend beyond the symbolism of it all. And any agreement that could be reached could, like I say, impact South Korea's economy, so and also security environment.
Right, and staying with that then, Professor Cho, what look to be the broader diplomatic gains, if you will, for South Korea should the leaders of the US and China both attend the APEC gathering and, of course, sit on the sidelines of this multilateral meeting?
I think it is a great chance for South Korea to help reduce tension, either directly or indirectly, between the two largest countries in the world. And simply providing a neutral ground for dialogue between US and China can greatly help stabilize the broader Indo-Pacific region. And this is also important for South Korean national interests, especially given rising security and also trade tension. And at the same time, this summit would allow South Korean government to demonstrate its balanced and pragmatic foreign policy approach. The Seoul is trying to maintain a strong military alliance with the United States, but it also values a stable relation with China, which is the largest trading partner for South Korea. So hosting both leaders at the same time can show that Korea can manage both relationship carefully and responsibly. So in general, I believe the hosting both Xi Jinping and Trump in Gyeongju would greatly strengthen the soft power of South Korea.
Right. Meanwhile, Raphael, ahead of his conference with the members of the foreign press here in South Korea, Foreign Minister Cho Hyun, as we mentioned earlier, sat down with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in Beijing. They both reaffirmed their commitment to bilateral ties and also to peace on the Korean peninsula. Could you tell us a bit more about their talks and your takeaways?
Yeah, I think this meeting that happened just the other day represented, I guess you'd call it a diplomatic reset, I think, after months of kind of strained relations and also under the previous administration. And Cho's visit to Beijing, I think, was also, of course, strategically timed ahead of Xi Jinping's potential or likely visit to South Korea ahead of APEC. So I think essentially it's like laying the groundwork for his visit. And also Wang Yi's welcoming tone, I think, was quite notable, and it was quite warm, emphasizing that China's Korea policy remains stable and consistent, and calling both countries to become true partners in strategic cooperation. So I think the Chinese side clearly views that the Lee government is a lot more pragmatic than its predecessors. On Korean peninsula issues, of course, Cho pressed China to help restart this dialogue with North Korea, and Wang pledged to continue playing a constructive role for peace and stability. I guess one thing that we would note is that there was an absence of the word denuclearization in the language of China's readout, while this was present in Korea's. So I think this suggests there might be some gaps in the approaches both countries have towards Pyongyang. Of course, we all know that North Korea's stance is very clear, that they will not denuclearize, and they want everyone to stop using that word. So I think that might have played a part. Yeah, there were also economic discussions. Cho acknowledged that the relationship is transitioning from a vertical division of labor to horizontal cooperation. So I think reflecting China's kind of technological advancements and the need for this new cooperation as the countries increasingly compete with one another rather than just complement each other. So I think, you know, overall, my takeaway is that both governments do recognize the need for stable relations despite these structural tensions. And I think APEC will be providing the perfect catalyst for any engagement coming up over the next months or years.
Right, and then briefly speaking, Professor Cho, with regard to South Korea's ties with China, how should it seek to navigate these ties?
Yeah, this is a very challenging question. So I'm going to introduce one just public opinion poll, because I fully agree with this public opinion poll result. So many people in Korea want to keep a strong military alliance with the United States. And they believe that this is the cornerstone of South Korean national security and also international strategy. But however, they believe that we need to maintain a stable and friendly relationship with China. And that's why they don't want Korea to get involved in, for example, a China-Taiwan conflict or any conflict in South China Sea. So this shows that Korea needs a careful and balanced foreign policy approach. We need to stay close with the United States for military security, but also talk to China and avoid unnecessary problems. I think that is a smart way forward for South Korea.
Right, I see. I shall by a public poll here then. All right, Professor Che, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. As always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Raphael, thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, and that ends this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.
죽었던 우리의 지혜가 제천에서 다시 태어났어. 세대를 관통한 선조들의 건강 빅데이터. 빅데이터. 우리의 삶과 들에서 자란 천연물은 단순한 재료가